In rural Vermont, a desperate single mother was about to make a $50 gamble that would upend everything. What started as buying a crumbling monastery took a shocking turn when she discovered a hidden crypt beneath the chapel. Elena Marsh wasn't your typical property flipper. For years, she had juggled 2 jobs while raising her daughter alone. Her art history dreams abandoned but never forgotten. When she found preserved remains clutching a leather journal, she had no idea she was uncovering a 175-year-old conspiracy that would force her to choose between her daughter's safety and exposing a truth powerful families had killed to protect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The monastery looked like something from a Gothic nightmare. Elena Marsh stood beside her rusted Honda, one hand shading her eyes against the gray November sky, the other gripping Sophie's small fingers. The building rose before them, all crumbling stone and broken windows. Sections of roof collapsed inward like a mouth missing teeth. Dead ivy climbed the walls in skeletal patterns, and the wooden door hung crooked on ancient hinges. "Mom," Sophie whispered, "are you sure about this?" Elena forced brightness into her voice. "It's got character, right? Just needs a little work." A little work. The phrase tasted like ash. The auction photos had been misleading at best, outright lies at worst. She'd known the property needed renovation. That's why it sold for $50. But this wasn't renovation. This was resurrection. Sophie's hand tightened in hers as they approached the entrance. Her daughter was 9 but carried the cautious wisdom of someone much older. Someone who'd learned early that adults couldn't always fix things. That fathers sometimes disappeared without explanation. That everything will be fine was often a beautiful lie. The door groaned open. Inside, the main chapel stretched before them, its vaulted ceiling still intact despite the decay. Afternoon light filtered through shattered stained glass, casting fractured rainbows across dust-thick pews. The air smelled of stone and abandonment and something older, incense. Maybe, from decades of prayers. Elena's art history training stirred, recognizing the architecture. 12th century foundation with 19th century additions. Romanesque arches meeting Gothic flourishes. Beautiful once. Could be beautiful again, if she had the money. Which she didn't. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. Final notice. 3 months or eviction proceeds. 3 months. 84 days. Approximately $847 in her checking account. 2 jobs that barely covered groceries and Sophie's school supplies. This monastery was supposed to be their salvation. Buy it cheap. Fix what needed fixing. Flip it to some wealthy buyer looking for a Vermont restoration project. Make enough to pay off the debts her ex-husband left behind and maybe, finally, breathe. "Look, Mom." Sophie had wandered to an old desk near the altar, pulling open drawers with the fearless curiosity Elena both loved and feared. "There are pictures." Elena crossed to her daughter, peering over her shoulder. Photographs, black and white, showing the monastery in its prime. Monks in robes tending gardens. The chapel filled with worshippers. A young priest smiling beside the fountain that now lay cracked and empty in the courtyard. "It was beautiful," Sophie said softly. "It will be again." Another lie. Or maybe a prayer. Elena wasn't sure which anymore. They explored the rest of the building as the afternoon wore on. The refectory with its long wooden tables, warped and water-damaged. The dormitory cells, most with caved-in ceilings. The kitchen, which might have been salvageable if the pipes hadn't burst years ago, leaving everything rusted beyond repair. But it was the heating system that broke her. Located in a stone room beneath the main building, the boiler was a corpse of twisted metal and disconnected pipes. Dead. Completely, utterly dead. And winter was coming to rural Vermont, where temperatures could drop to 20 below. Elena sank onto the stone floor, her carefully maintained composure cracking. What had she done? What kind of mother gambled her last $50 on a building that might collapse around them? Sophie needed stability, warmth, safety. Not this crumbling monument to Elena's desperation and foolish hope. "Mom." Sophie's voice floated down the stairs. "I'm hungry." Right. Dinner. Normal things. She could do this. They ate peanut butter sandwiches sitting on sleeping bags in what had been the monastery library. the only room with an intact roof and solid floor. Elena had packed camping gear, planning for roughing it during initial repairs. She hadn't planned for roughing it through winter in a building with no heat. The shadows lengthened. She lit the battery-powered lantern, casting warm light across stone walls lined with empty shelves. Once, this room held knowledge. Now it held two people and their rapidly dwindling options. "Mom," Sophie said, her sandwich half-eaten in her lap. "Did we make a mistake coming here?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Sophie wasn't really asking about the monastery. She was asking if Elena knew what she was doing, if they'd be okay, if she could trust her mother's judgment when that judgment had already failed them so many times. Trusting Sophie's father, dropping out of graduate school, taking jobs that paid bills but killed dreams. Elena met her daughter's eyes. Hazel, like her own, old beyond their years. "No, sweetheart. This is going to work out. You'll see." Sophie held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded and finished her sandwich. But Elena saw it, that flicker of doubt, quickly hidden. Sophie wanted to believe her, chose to believe her, but the faith was wearing thin. They settled into their sleeping bags as full darkness fell. Through broken windows, Elena could hear the Vermont wilderness. Wind in bare branches, the distant call of an owl, the settling sounds of an old building adjusting to new occupants. Her mind wouldn't stop calculating. 3 months. Need new heating system, 15,000 minimum. Roof repairs, another 20. Windows, plumbing, electrical. She'd need at least 60,000 to make this place sellable. She had $847. Unless she found something valuable. The monastery had been active until 2015, abandoned for nearly 10 years. Maybe there were artifacts, religious items, something she could sell to fund repairs. It was a desperate thought, probably illegal, definitely unethical. But desperation made ethics flexible. Sleep came fitfully. Elena drifted in and out, her dreams full of numbers and collapsing roofs and Sophie's accusing eyes. She woke to pale morning light and the sound of Sophie's voice outside, talking to herself the way she did when exploring. Elena pulled on her jacket and stepped into the courtyard, breath misting in the cold November air. Sophie was in the small cemetery behind the chapel, examining weathered headstones. "Look, Mom. Some of these are really old. 1847. 1852. Who were they? Monks, probably. People who lived here." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. They'd need to find somewhere warmer to sleep tonight. Maybe the hardware store in town sold space heaters. "I'm going to explore more," Sophie announced, already moving toward the far edge of the cemetery where forest encroached on sacred ground. "Stay where I can see you," Elena called, then returned inside, her practical mind already listing tasks. Clear debris, assess damage, figure out which rooms could be weatherproofed for winter living. She started in the chapel, pulling aside fallen beams and broken pews. The physical work helped, burning away the anxiety that had settled in her chest like ice. This was something she could control. Clear space, create order. Behind the altar, a massive bookshelf had toppled, spilling rotted volumes across the floor. Elena began moving books, stacking the less damaged ones, throwing the ruined ones into a pile for disposal. The shelf itself was beautiful, carved oak with intricate details. If she could restore it, it might be worth something. As she dragged it away from the wall, something caught her eye. The stone behind where the bookshelf had stood wasn't flush with the wall. There was a seam, barely visible, running in a rectangular pattern. And at the bottom, partially concealed by debris, the edge of what looked like stone stairs descending into darkness. Elena's breath caught. Her art history training kicked in, that old excitement she hadn't felt in years flooding through her veins. She recognized this. Architectural anomalies suggesting hidden spaces. Monasteries often had crypts, storage areas, places of meditation below the main chapel. She knelt, brushing away dust and broken wood. Definitely stairs. Ancient, worn smooth by countless feet, leading down into a darkness that felt less like absence and more like presence. Like the past pressing against the present, waiting to be acknowledged. Common sense said to leave it alone. Focus on practical repairs. Don't waste time exploring when they needed heat and shelter. But Elena's hands were already clearing more debris, her heart beating faster. This was why she'd loved art history, why she'd spent years studying medieval architecture before life intervened. The mystery, the discovery, the possibility that the past still had secrets to reveal. Sophie's voice drifted in from outside, singing something to herself. Safe. Occupied. Elena had time to investigate. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and peered down into the darkness. The stairs descended perhaps 15 feet, ending in what looked like a stone floor. The air rising from below was cool and dry, carrying a faint scent of earth and old incense. 1 step. 2. The stones were solid despite their age. 3 steps. 4. Her phone's light barely penetrated the darkness, but she could make out the edges of a chamber below. This was foolish. She should get proper equipment, maybe contact historical society. But her feet kept moving, drawn by something she couldn't name. That old hunger for discovery. Or maybe just the desperate hope that this crumbling monastery might hold something valuable after all. The stairs ended. Elena stepped onto the crypt floor and raised her phone, sweeping light across the space. Her breath stopped. The chamber was small but perfectly preserved, its walls carved with symbols she recognized from her studies, scales of justice, opened books, hands reaching skyward. In the center stood a stone sarcophagus, its surface unmarked except for a single inscription worn almost smooth by time. Elena moved closer, her academic training cataloging details even as her heart raced. 19th century construction, based on the style. Single occupant. Hidden deliberately, not forgotten accidentally. This wasn't just a storage room or meditation space. This was a burial chamber, a secret one. And suddenly, standing in the darkness beneath a monastery she'd bought for $50, Elena understood that she'd found something far more valuable and far more dangerous than salvageable artifacts. She'd found a mystery, one that someone had worked very hard to hide. The stone walls seemed to press closer. The darkness felt heavier. And somewhere above, Sophie's innocent singing continued, unaware that her mother had just stepped across a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. Elena stood there, phone light trembling slightly in her hand, and wondered if this discovery would save them or destroy them. The question hung in the cold air of the crypt, unanswered, waiting, like the secrets that had been waiting here, beneath the chapel floor, for nearly 200 years. Elena's hands trembled as she stood before the sarcophagus, her phone's light casting sharp shadows across the carved stone. 2 days had passed since she'd first descended into the crypt. 2 days of telling Sophie it was just another room that needed cleaning while obsession consumed her thoughts like fire through dry wood. She'd spent those days clearing the stairway properly, hauling debris in careful loads while her daughter explored the cemetery or read in their makeshift camp in the library. The physical work steadied her hands but did nothing for the thoughts racing through her mind. This was what she'd lost when she abandoned graduate school. This hunger, this need to know. Now, alone in the crypt while Sophie slept upstairs, Elena ran her fingers along the sarcophagus lid. The inscription was almost illegible, worn by time and perhaps deliberately obscured. She could make out partial letters. Eth. Bella. 847. Her academic training cataloged the details. Mid-19th century construction. Deliberate concealment rather than ceremonial burial. Someone had wanted this person hidden, not honored. The lid was heavy, solid stone, but age had shifted it slightly. Elena wedged her fingers into the gap, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was wrong. She should contact authorities, historians, someone official. But the thought of bureaucrats taking over, of losing this discovery to institutional process, made her chest tight with an anxiety she recognized as selfish but couldn't dismiss. She pushed. The stone scraped against stone, a sound like breaking bones. Pushed harder. The lid shifted, moved, gave way with a grinding protest that echoed off the crypt walls. Inside, preserved by the dry air and cool darkness, lay the mummified remains of a young woman. Elena's breath caught. The body was still dressed. Fabric had survived where flesh had desiccated. A dress from the 1840s. She recognized the style. High collar, long sleeves, the kind of modest dress a respectable young woman would have worn. But there was nothing respectable about how she'd been buried. No ceremony, no marker, just concealment. The woman's skeletal hands were folded across her chest, and clutched between them were two objects that had survived the decades intact. A leather-bound journal, its cover cracked but whole, and an ornate brass key, its metal untarnished in the sealed environment. Elena's hands shook as she reached for them. Her phone nearly slipped from her grip, and she had to stop, breathe, force steadiness into her movements. She photographed everything first: the body, the position, the objects, the surrounding crypt, her academic training overriding her excitement with methodology. Then, carefully, reverently, she lifted the journal from the skeletal fingers. The leather was soft with age, the binding fragile. She opened it slowly, terrified it would crumble. The first page bore elegant handwriting in faded brown ink. This journal belongs to Catherine Elizabeth Bellamy. If found, please return to the Bellamy estate, Vermont. Year of our Lord, 1847. Catherine Bellamy. The name on the sarcophagus. Elena's pulse quickened. She turned pages carefully, her phone's light revealing entry after entry in that same elegant hand. Dated entries spanning what looked like 2 years. The writing was small, cramped, as if Catherine had been trying to conserve paper or perhaps hide how much she was writing. Elena wanted to read it all immediately, but the crypt's cold was seeping into her bones, and her phone battery was dying. She took the journal and key, leaving everything else exactly as she'd found it, and climbed back up the stairs. In the library, she wrapped herself in her sleeping bag and positioned the lantern close. Sophie slept soundly in her own bag, her face peaceful in a way that made Elena's chest ache with love and guilt. What kind of mother brought her child to a place like this? The kind who was out of options, she reminded herself. The kind who was trying. She opened Catherine's journal and began to read. The early entries were mundane, descriptions of daily life, complaints about the weather, observations about monastery visitors. But Catherine's voice came through clearly, intelligent, curious, constrained by the rigid social expectations of her time. She wrote about her father, a wealthy benefactor to the monastery, about the monks and their rituals, about the crushing boredom of being a young woman with education but no outlet for it. Then, about 6 months into the entries, a shift. Catherine began writing about M. Came to tend the gardens today. I watched from the library window. Father would be furious if he knew I noticed the groundskeeper's daughter, but I cannot help myself. There is something in the way she moves, the way she looks at the world, that speaks to a kindred spirit. Elena's breath quickened. She recognized that tone, that carefully coded language. The entries continued, growing bolder. Secret meetings in the monastery garden. Stolen conversations in the library. Catherine's terror and exhilaration at feelings she couldn't name openly but couldn't deny. Kissed me today. In the hidden chapel, where no one goes. I thought I would die from the fear and the joy of it. How can something so pure feel so dangerous? How can loving her be wrong when it is the only thing that has ever felt right? Elena found tears on her cheeks. This young woman, dead for nearly 180 years, had loved someone when loving them could destroy everything. Had written it down despite the risk, needing to preserve the truth of her feelings even if no one could ever know. But then the tone shifted again. Fear entered the writing, no longer just about discovery but about something darker. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I overheard Father and the others last night. They spoke of the fund and the travelers. Father was angry, saying the money should serve our purposes, not theirs. I did not understand at first, but then Mr. Harrison mentioned the routes, the safe houses. My blood ran cold. The charitable fund for helping escaped slaves. They are stealing from it, using money meant to save lives to build their fortunes. Elena sat up straighter, her historian's mind recognizing the significance. The Underground Railroad had been active in Vermont in the 1840s. If Catherine's father and other town founders had been embezzling from abolitionist funds, she read faster, watching Catherine's horror unfold across the pages. The young woman had started gathering evidence, copying financial records, documenting conversations. She planned to expose them, to flee with Mary, M. finally named, to start a new life somewhere they could be safe and free. The entries became hurried, frightened. They know. Father confronted me about the missing ledgers. I denied everything, but I saw the suspicion in his eyes. M. says we must leave tonight, but I cannot go without the evidence. Too many have suffered. Too many will continue to suffer if I stay silent. I have hidden the documents where they will never find them. M. has the map. If something happens to me, she will know. The entry ended mid-sentence. The ink trailed off as if the pen had been pulled from Catherine's hand. The rest of the pages were blank. Elena sat in the lamplight, the journal trembling in her hands, and understood what she was holding. Not just a tragic love story, though it was that. Not just historical evidence, though it was that too. She was holding a murder confession. Catherine Bellamy hadn't died. She'd been killed, and whoever had done it had buried her in secret, letting the world believe she'd run away or died elsewhere. The key felt heavy in her pocket. What did it open? Where had Catherine hidden the evidence she'd gathered? And why? Elena wondered with growing dread. Did the name Bellamy sound familiar? She pulled out her phone, searched for Bellamy, Vermont. The results made her stomach drop. Harrison Bellamy III, town council chairman and major property developer. His family had been prominent in the area since the 1800s. Pillars of the community. Wealthy, powerful, respected, built on murder and theft. If Catherine's journal was telling the truth. Elena looked at Sophie sleeping peacefully, then at the journal in her hands. She thought about the $50 that was all the money she'd been able to risk. About the crumbling monastery that was supposed to save them. About the choice Catherine had made. Truth over safety, justice over survival. Outside, the November wind howled through broken windows. Inside, the past pressed against the present, demanding to be acknowledged. And Elena Marsh, former art history student, current desperate mother, sat in the darkness and wondered if some secrets were meant to stay buried. The key in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, waiting. The week passed in a blur of pretense and obsession. Elena worked on basic repairs during the day, patching broken windows with plastic sheeting, clearing debris from rooms they might weatherproof for winter. But her mind was always elsewhere, circling back to Catherine's journal like a moth to flame. She read it in stolen moments, while Sophie explored the grounds. During lunch breaks from her remote graphic design work, late at night when exhaustion should have claimed her but adrenaline kept her eyes open, scanning those elegant lines by lamplight. Catherine's voice became as familiar as her own thoughts. The young woman emerged fully from the pages, passionate, intelligent, trapped in a world that had no place for who she was or what she felt. Her love for Mary was written in careful code at first, then with increasing boldness as if the act of writing itself was a kind of freedom. Mary taught me the names of all the herbs in the garden today. Her hands were dirt-stained, and when she laughed at my clumsy attempts to distinguish sage from thyme, I wanted to kiss her right there in the sunlight. Instead, I memorized the way light caught in her dark hair, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. These small stolen moments are all we have, and I hoard them like a miser hoards gold. Elena found herself crying over passages like that. This woman had been dead for 175 years, but her love felt immediate, raw, achingly real. The courage it took to even write these words, knowing discovery meant ruin, it humbled Elena in ways she couldn't articulate. But it was the later entries that made sleep impossible. Catherine had been meticulous in documenting what she discovered. Her father, Jeremiah Bellamy, along with 4 other founding families, had established a charitable fund ostensibly to support Underground Railroad operations in Vermont. Churches and abolitionists across New England had contributed thousands of dollars meant to provide safe houses, food, transportation for people fleeing slavery. Instead, the founders had been systematically embezzling those funds, using the money to expand their business holdings, purchase land, build their fortunes. And when freedom seekers arrived expecting help, expecting the safe passage their allies had paid for, Elena's hands shook as she read Catherine's careful documentation of what she'd overheard. Father and Mr. Harrison were drunk last night. I heard them from the library, their voices carrying through the open window. Harrison was laughing about the travelers who got lost in the woods. Father told him to keep his voice down, but Harrison said, "Who's to know? They're ghosts already, aren't they? No one even knows their names." Then I heard Father say, 7 this year. The fund is healthier for it. They were laughing. 7 people. 7 human beings who'd risked everything for freedom, who'd trusted in a network of good people, who'd arrived in Vermont expecting sanctuary and instead found. Elena couldn't finish the thought, but Catherine had. Catherine had understood exactly what her father and his associates were doing. They weren't just embezzling. They were murdering the people they were supposed to protect, stealing whatever money or valuables those desperate souls carried, and burying the evidence along with the bodies. The entries from Catherine's final weeks were frantic, determined. I have copied the ledgers showing the discrepancies. I have written down every conversation I've overheard. Mary has been asking questions among the servants, gathering names, dates, anything that might prove what we suspect. We are building a case, though I do not know to whom we can present it. Father's influence reaches to the governor himself. But we must try. We must. Mary says we should just run. Take what evidence we have and disappear. Start new lives where no one knows us. Part of me wants that so desperately I can taste it. But how can I live with myself knowing I stayed silent? How can I choose my own happiness over justice for the dead? Elena recognized that conflict intimately. The same choice she faced every day, do what's right or do what's safe. Catherine had chosen right, and it had killed her. The final entries showed Catherine hiding the evidence somewhere in the monastery, somewhere only Mary would know. She'd made arrangements to meet with a sympathetic journalist in Boston. She'd planned to expose everything, then flee with Mary before her father could retaliate. Tomorrow, everything changes. Either we succeed and the truth finally matters more than money and power, or we fail and I suppose I will join the travelers I'm trying to avenge. Mary is frightened. I am too, but I keep thinking of those 7 people. 7 souls who trusted in human goodness and found human greed instead. If I do nothing, I betray them twice. Once by being my father's daughter, and again by choosing my own safety over their memory. Mary is waiting for me in the hidden chapel. We will. The sentence ended there. The pen had scratched across the page as if yanked away midward. Elena had stared at that unfinished line for hours, imagining what had happened. Catherine discovered, confronted, killed and buried in the crypt while Mary. What had happened to Mary? Elena set the journal down and picked up her phone. She'd been researching the Bellamy family for days now, building a picture of their continued prominence. Harrison Bellamy III wasn't just wealthy. He sat on the town council, owned half the commercial real estate in the county, had his hands in state politics. His great-great-great-grandfather was Jeremiah Bellamy, Catherine's father. The family's fortune, their social standing, their power, all of it built on theft and murder. And they were still here, still influential, still benefiting from crimes committed 175 years ago. Elena thought about the key in her pocket. Catherine had hidden evidence. Real proof, not just journal entries that could be dismissed as the fantasies of a disturbed young woman. Documents, ledgers, something concrete enough that she died rather than let her father destroy it. That evidence might still exist, might still be findable. And if Elena found it, Sophie stirred in her sleeping bag, murmuring something in her sleep. Elena watched her daughter's peaceful face and felt the weight of impossible choices settling onto her shoulders. Just like Catherine, she was trapped between doing what was safe and doing what was right. The Bellamy family was powerful. If they'd killed to protect their secrets once, what would they do if those secrets resurfaced? What would they do to someone threatening to expose them? What would they do to Sophie? Elena closed the journal carefully, her mind racing. She should stop. Forget what she'd read. Focus on the monastery repairs, on survival, on keeping her daughter safe and fed and warm. Catherine's story was tragic, but it was history. Dead and buried. Except it wasn't. Not really. The Bellamys were still here, still powerful, still benefiting from blood money. And somewhere in this crumbling monastery, evidence existed that could bring them down. Outside, the Vermont night pressed against the plastic-covered windows. The wind carried the scent of coming snow. Winter was coming, and Elena had no heat, no money, no plan except a desperate hope that she could somehow make this work. She looked at Catherine's journal, then at Sophie, then at the brass key that had rested in a dead woman's hands for nearly 2 centuries. The past wasn't past at all. It was right here, waiting, demanding, and Elena had to decide if she was brave enough or foolish enough to answer. Lucas Grant's truck rumbled up the Monastery drive on a cold morning that promised snow. Elena watched from the chapel window as a man in his late 30s climbed out, tool belt slung low on his hips, eyes scanning the building with the practiced assessment of someone who knew structural damage when he saw it. She'd called him 3 days ago, choosing his quote because it was the lowest. Now, watching him approach, she wondered if cheap meant inexperienced. They couldn't afford mistakes. Ms. Marsh. His voice was quiet, almost cautious. Up close, she saw dark eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. I'm Lucas. Here about the repairs. Thank you for coming. Elena stepped aside to let him enter. It's worse than I thought when I bought it. Usually is with these old places. He moved through the chapel methodically, checking walls, testing floorboards, examining the damaged ceiling. His movements were economical, efficient, a man who didn't waste energy on unnecessary gestures. Sophie appeared from the library, her curiosity overcoming her usual shyness with strangers. Are you going to fix our house? Lucas glanced at Elena, something flickering in his expression. Going to try. You must be Sophie. How did you know my name? Your mom mentioned you on the phone. He crouched to Sophie's level, his voice gentling. What do you think needs fixing first? Sophie considered this seriously. The heat. Mom says we need heat before winter really comes. Smart kid. Lucas stood, meeting Elena's eyes. She's right. Heating system is priority 1. Can I see the boiler room? Elena led him through the building, Sophie trailing behind, chattering about the cemetery and the old photographs and how the monastery was probably haunted but in a friendly way. Lucas listened with half his attention, the other half clearly cataloging every crack, every water stain, every structural weakness. In the boiler room, he spent 15 minutes examining the dead system, occasionally making notes on a battered clipboard. Finally, he straightened, his expression grim. I can patch some things, but this system is done. You need a complete replacement. That's $15,000. Minimum. Elena's stomach dropped. I don't have that kind of money. I know. He said it without judgment, just fact. I can rig something temporary. Space heaters, seal off the rooms you're actually using. Get you through winter for maybe $2,000. But come spring, you'll need a real solution. $2,000 was still more than she had, but it was closer to possible. Okay, let's do that. I'll start tomorrow. Need to order some supplies. He made more notes, then glanced at Sophie. There's a graveyard out back, right? Mind if I take a look? Sometimes old monasteries have interesting stonework. Sophie brightened. I'll show you. I know where all the oldest graves are. They headed outside, Sophie's voice carrying back as she explained her cemetery explorations. Elena returned to the library, where her laptop sat open. She'd been researching property values, trying to calculate if she could ever recoup her investment, when she'd gotten distracted by Catherine's journal. The journal lay on the desk, partially hidden under papers. She should put it away. Lucas would be back soon, and footsteps on stone. She turned to find Lucas in the doorway, his face drained of color. What is that? His voice was tight. Elena followed his gaze to her laptop screen. She'd forgotten she had the crypt photographs open, the sarcophagus, the remains, the journal in skeletal hands. It's nothing, just something I found. Seal it back up. Lucas crossed the room in 3 strides, his earlier calm shattered. Right now. Seal it up and never mention it to anyone. The intensity in his voice frightened her. I don't understand. You found the crypt. Not a question. His hands were shaking. You opened it. You took something. How do you know about? Everyone knows. His laugh was bitter. Everyone in this town knows there's something under the monastery. We just don't talk about it. Because talking about it gets you. He stopped, his jaw working. Seal it up. Forget you ever saw it. Elena felt her spine stiffen. I can't do that. You have to. You have a daughter. He gestured toward the window where Sophie could be seen examining a gravestone. You think the Bellamys are going to let you? Bellamy. Elena's heart rate spiked. What do you know about the Bellamys? Lucas stared at her for a long moment, some internal battle playing out behind his eyes. Finally, his shoulders sagged. My father tried to expose them. 20 years ago, he found evidence of corruption, embezzlement, connections to state contracts being rigged. He went to the authorities. What happened? Harrison Bellamy 3 happened. The name came out like poison. Suddenly, there was evidence against my father. Falsified documents showing he'd been the one embezzling. Witnesses who swore they'd seen him do things he'd never done. The judge was a Bellamy family friend. The prosecutor owed them favors. My father went to prison. Elena's throat tightened. Did he? He died there. 3 years into a 10-year sentence. Stabbed in the prison yard. They called it gang violence, but everyone knew. Lucas's voice cracked. My mother never recovered. She's in a care facility now. Doesn't even recognize me most days. I was 18 when they destroyed my family. I'm 38 now, and the Bellamys are still here, still powerful, still crushing anyone who threatens them. The story hit Elena like cold water. This wasn't just history. This was now. Real danger, not academic interest. They own the sheriff, Lucas continued. The town council chairman is Harrison Bellamy himself. Half the judges in the county owe their positions to Bellamy money. If you found something that threatens them, he looked at the laptop screen again. That's Catherine Bellamy, isn't it? The daughter who disappeared in 1847? You know about her? Everyone knows the story. She ran away with a servant or died of fever, depending on who you ask. But there were always rumors that she found out something about her father, that she didn't run away at all. He met Elena's eyes. If you have proof of what really happened, if you have evidence of what the Bellamy family did, they'll come after me. They'll destroy you. He said it with certainty, just like they destroyed my father, just like they've destroyed everyone who's ever threatened their precious legacy. Silence fell between them. Outside, Sophie's laughter carried on the wind. Inside, the weight of truth pressed down like the monastery's stone walls. Elena thought about Catherine's final words, about choosing right over safe, about 7 people who died because men valued money over human lives. I can't just ignore this. You have to. Lucas's voice was almost pleading. For your daughter's sake. These people are dangerous. They were dangerous 175 years ago, too. That didn't stop Catherine from trying. And look what happened to her. He gestured at the laptop. She's dead, buried in secret, her story erased. You want that for yourself? For Sophie? Before Elena could answer, headlights swept across the window. A car had pulled onto the access road, parking where it had a clear view of the monastery. Just sitting there, watching. Lucas saw it too. His face went even paler. That started already? 3 nights ago. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. After I found the journal. They know. Lucas backed toward the door. I shouldn't be here. If they see me helping you, Lucas. Elena stepped forward. Your father tried to fight them. Don't you want to finish what he started? He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, his whole body taut with conflicting impulses. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I want to survive. I want my mother to have someone who visits her. I want to not end up like my father. He looked at her, and she saw the war in his eyes, grief and rage and fear all tangled together. But if you're really going to do this, if you're actually crazy enough to go after the Bellamys, then, he took a shaky breath. Then you're going to need help. Someone who knows how they operate, how they think. You'll help me? I'll probably regret it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But yeah, I'll help. For my father. For everyone they've crushed. He glanced at the watching car. But we have to be smart. Careful. One wrong move and they'll bury us both. Sophie's voice called from outside, asking Lucas to look at another gravestone. He composed his face, burying the fear and anger, and headed toward the door. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we'll start the heating work. but we'll also start planning. Figure out what you actually have, what it proves, and how to use it without getting killed." He left. Elena watched him walk towards Sophie, his movements careful, controlled. A man who'd learned to hide what he really felt. The car on the road didn't move, just watched, waiting. Elena closed her laptop and looked at Catherine's journal. The past and present had just collided, and there was no going back now. She'd crossed a line by opening that crypt, by reading those words, by caring about a woman dead for nearly 2 centuries. Now she had to decide how far she was willing to go, and what she was willing to risk. Outside, snow began to fall. Father Marcus Webb lived in a small apartment above the town's Catholic church, 15 minutes from the monastery. Elena had found his name in the property records, the last priest to serve at the monastery before its closure in 2015. If anyone knew the building's secrets, it would be him. She'd left Sophie with Lucas, who was installing space heaters and had promised to keep her occupied with stories about the monastery's architecture. The drive through town showed Elena just how deeply the Bellamy name was woven into the community. Bellamy Medical Center, Bellamy Park, the Harrison Bellamy 3 Community Foundation building on Main Street. Blood money, all of it. If Catherine's journal told the truth. Father Webb answered on the 3rd knock. He was smaller than she'd expected, his face deeply lined, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the doorframe. 78, according to her research. For decades serving the monastery before retirement. Father Webb? I'm Elena Marsh. I called yesterday about the monastery. His voice was soft, resigned. Come in. The apartment was sparse. A worn couch, a small kitchen table, bookshelves lined with theological texts, a crucifix on the wall. Through the window, Elena could see the church steeple pointing toward gray November sky. Tea, he offered. Thank you. They sat at the kitchen table. Elena pulled out photocopies of Catherine's journal pages. She'd learned from Lucas's reaction not to show the originals to anyone. Father Webb's hands shook harder as he accepted them, his eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. Where did you find this? His voice was barely audible. In the crypt, beneath the chapel. He closed his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. When he opened them again, tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. I knew, he whispered. All these years, I knew something was down there. I felt it every time I said Massachusetts. Like the building itself was trying to confess. Elena leaned forward. What do you know about Catherine Bellamy? Father Webb set down the photocopies with hands that couldn't quite stay steady. His fingers traced the edges of the pages as if touching something sacred and terrible at once. When I first came to the monastery in 1975, I was young, idealistic. I thought serving God meant seeking truth. His laugh was bitter. Father Thomas, the priest before me, was dying. Cancer. On his deathbed, he made me promise something. He stood, moving to the window, his back to Elena. He said, Marcus, there are things beneath this place that must never be disturbed. Promise me you'll leave them buried. Promise me you'll keep the silence. I promised. I was 28 years old, and I promised a dying man I would protect secrets I didn't even understand. But you found out, Elena said quietly. Pieces. Over the years. He turned back to her. The church records had been altered. I could see where entries had been removed, pages torn out, references to Catherine Bellamy that led nowhere. I asked the older parishioners, the ones who remembered the old stories. They would get quiet, nervous, change the subject. What did they tell you? That the Bellamy family had paid the monastery's operating costs for generations. That certain questions weren't asked in exchange for that generosity. That Father Thomas himself had been given a substantial gift when he agreed to maintain the tradition of silence. Father Webb's voice cracked. I was complicit. I took their money. I said their masses. I kept my promise to a dead man and let the truth stay buried. Elena pulled out more photocopies. The entries about the embezzlement, the overheard conversation about travelers getting lost. Father Webb read them with shaking hands, his face growing ashen. Dear God, he breathed. It was worse than I thought. You knew about the Underground Railroad connection? I suspected. There were records of substantial charitable contributions in the 1840s, money that supposedly went to abolitionist causes, but the amounts never quite matched up with what the historical accounts said was available. He set down the papers. I told myself it was just poor record-keeping, that there was some innocent explanation. There wasn't. Elena's voice was hard. Catherine's father and 4 other founding families were stealing money meant to help enslaved people escape. And when those people arrived expecting help, they killed them. Father Webb sank into his chair. Sweet Jesus. They killed them and buried them somewhere. And I've been saying Mass over their graves for 40 years without even knowing. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of long-delayed truth. Catherine found evidence, Elena said. Real proof. Financial records. Letters. Documentation of everything. She hid it somewhere in the monastery. I found this with her body. She pulled out the brass key. Father Webb stared at it as if it were a serpent. I don't know what it opens, Elena continued. But Catherine wrote that Mary, the woman she loved, had a map. Instructions for finding where the evidence was hidden. Mary Winters. Father Webb's voice was distant. The groundskeeper's daughter. She disappeared the same time Catherine did. The story was they ran away together, that Catherine had been corrupted by unnatural affections. He looked up, but she didn't run away, did she? Catherine was murdered and buried in the crypt. I don't know what happened to Mary. Father Webb stood abruptly, moving to a locked cabinet. He pulled out a ring of keys, his movements suddenly urgent. When Father Thomas died, he left me something. Said I'd know when to use it. He unlocked the cabinet, reaching into the back. I never understood what he meant. Until now. He pulled out a rolled piece of aged parchment, its edges yellowed with time. As he unrolled it on the table, Elena's breath caught. It was a map, the monastery's original layout from the 1840s, drawn in meticulous detail. Buildings that no longer existed were marked in fading ink. The chapel, the refectory, the dormitories, and in the forest behind the monastery, a small structure labeled Chapel of St. Mary Magdalene. The hidden chapel, Elena whispered. It was torn down in the 1860s, supposedly because it was structurally unsound. Father Webb's finger traced the location. But I always wondered if there was another reason, if they were hiding something. Elena pulled out her phone, comparing the map to modern satellite images. The location would be deep in the forest, perhaps a quarter-mile from the monastery proper. Overgrown. Forgotten. But maybe not empty. If you go looking, Father Webb said quietly, Harrison Bellamy will know. He has people watching you already, doesn't he? How did you? Because he's been watching me for 40 years, waiting to see if I'd break my silence. His father watched Father Thomas before me. This family doesn't forgive threats, Ms. Marsh. They eliminate them. Like they eliminated your predecessor? Father Webb flinched. Father Thomas's cancer was real, but it came on very suddenly, very aggressively, after he'd mentioned to someone that perhaps it was time the monastery's full history was revealed. I could never prove anything, but I've always wondered. He re-rolled the map with trembling hands and held it out to Elena. I'm an old man. I've lived with this guilt long enough. If you're brave enough to seek the truth, then I'll help you. But you need to understand what you're facing. Harrison Bellamy III is not just wealthy and powerful. He's ruthless. His family has maintained their position for 175 years by destroying anyone who threatens them. Your handyman friend knows that firsthand. You know about Lucas? I knew his father. Good man. Honest man. They crushed him like an insect. Father Webb's eyes were fierce despite their wetness. Don't underestimate what they're capable of. And don't trust the authorities. Half of them are on the Bellamy payroll, and the other half are too scared to act. Elena took the map, feeling its weight like a physical thing. Catherine knew all this. She knew what they'd do to her, but she tried anyway, and died for it. Father Webb gripped her hand. The question is whether you're willing to do the same. Because once you find that evidence, once you know the full truth, they'll give you the same choice they gave Catherine. Silence or death. Outside, church bells rang for evening vespers. Inside, two people stood in a kitchen holding a map to buried secrets. and the past pressed against the present like a wound that had never healed. "One more thing," Father Webb said as Elena moved toward the door. "The evidence Catherine gathered, it wasn't just about the past. That family's corruption didn't end in 1847. It evolved, adapted. If she documented what they were doing then, imagine what documentation of what they've done since might reveal." Elena's hand froze on the doorknob. "You think the evidence goes beyond Catherine's time?" "I think," Father Webb said carefully, "that powerful families who get away with murder once tend to make it a habit. And I think Catherine was smarter than her father gave her credit for. Smart enough to hide something that would matter not just to her time, but to all the times that followed." Elena left with the map burning in her bag and questions burning in her mind. The watching car was back, parked across from the church. She drove past it slowly, meeting the driver's eyes through the windshield. Let them watch. Let them report back to Harrison Bellamy that she wasn't scared. Even if that was a lie. Even if her hands shook the whole way home. The forest behind the monastery was dense with bare trees and decades of undergrowth. Elena picked her way through frozen leaves, Father Webb's map clutched in one hand, her phone's GPS in the other. Lucas walked beside her, carrying the tools they might need: a shovel, a pry bar, heavy gloves. Sophie was at her first day of school in town. Elena had agonized over the decision, but keeping her daughter isolated would raise more questions. Besides, Lucas had assured her the school was public, neutral territory. Even the Bellamys wouldn't try anything there. She hoped he was right. "Should be close," Lucas murmured, consulting the map. The chapel was maybe 50 yards from that rock formation. December cold bit through Elena's jacket. The sky threatened snow, heavy clouds pressing low over the treetops. They'd been searching for 2 hours, finding nothing but forest and the occasional foundation stone from long-demolished outbuildings. Then Lucas stopped. There. Elena followed his gaze. At first, she saw only trees and undergrowth. Then her eye caught the pattern, stones too regular to be natural, arranged in what had once been walls. Barely visible under decades of growth, a collapsed structure emerged from the landscape like a ghost. They moved closer. The chapel had been small, perhaps 20 feet square. 3 walls had fallen, but portions of the foundation remained. And there, still standing despite everything, was a weather-worn stone statue. Mary, the Mother of Christ, hands outstretched in benediction. The same St. Catherine's lover had been named for. Chapel of St. Mary Magdalene, Elena whispered, remembering the map's label. Mary Magdalene, the saint often associated with fallen women, outcasts, those who loved differently. Lucas was already clearing debris from the chapel floor, working systematically. If Catherine hid something here, it would be protected. Underground, probably. They worked in silence, removing fallen stones and rotted wood. The physical labor warmed Elena despite the cold, her breath misting in the air. Her hands ached, her back protested, but she couldn't stop. Catherine had been here, had hidden her evidence in this place that honored the outcast saint, the woman who'd loved despite judgment. Elena. Lucas's voice was tight. Here. He'd uncovered a section of floor, stone slabs fitted together, but one was slightly different from the others. Newer, or at least placed more recently than the original construction. They worked it loose together, prying at the edges until it lifted. Beneath was a small chamber, lined with metal. A waterproof box sat inside, its surface corroded but intact. Elena's hands shook as she lifted it out. The box was heavy, solid. A lock held it closed, but age had weakened the mechanism. Lucas wedged the pry bar into the seam and pulled. The lock broke with a crack that echoed through the empty forest. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had survived the decades, was a leather portfolio. Elena opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, letters, ledger pages, a carefully written account in Catherine's handwriting. She scanned the pages quickly, her historian's training cataloging what she was seeing. Letters between the founding families discussing the fund and how best to redirect resources. Financial records showing money received for abolitionist work but spent on land purchases and business investments. And then, most damning, a list of names. Freedom seekers who arrived in Vermont expecting aid, 1845 to 1847. Samuel, aged approximately 30. Ruth and her children James, 8, and Sarah, 5. Isaiah, aged approximately 25. Rebecca, aged approximately 20. Thomas, aged approximately 35. 7 people. 7 souls who trusted in human goodness and found murder instead. Below the list, Catherine had written in her precise hand. These people were robbed of the money they carried, funds given to them by abolitionists in the South to purchase their freedom should they be caught. My father and the others took this money, then buried the victims in unmarked graves in the forest north of the monastery. I heard Mr. Harrison boast of it while drunk. I have recorded everything. May God forgive them, for I cannot. But there was more. Tucked deeper in the portfolio were additional documents, letters dated after Catherine's supposed death in 1847, letters in different handwriting, letters signed M. W. Mary Winters. Elena's breath caught as she read. Mary had survived, had escaped. The letters were addressed to someone named Sarah, describing how she'd helped Catherine fake her death using a body from a recent fever outbreak, how they'd fled to Boston, lived as sisters, built a life together under assumed names. Catherine lived until 1887, dying peacefully in her sleep at age 60. We had 40 years together, Sarah. 40 years of freedom and love and joy. She never regretted her choice, though it meant losing everything she'd been born to. She said truth and love were worth any price. The final letter was dated 1891, written in Mary's shaking hand. I am old now and ready to join Catherine. I have added to the evidence she gathered documentation of what the Bellamy family has continued to do, how they have maintained their wealth through corruption and cruelty. My grandchildren will guard this truth, passing it from generation to generation, until the right person finds it, until the world is ready to listen. The key Catherine left will open a safe deposit box at Boston First National Bank. Account number 847 to 1847 megabytes. Inside is everything. The original documents, proof that spans generations, evidence that the corruption did not end with Catherine's escape but continued, evolved, spread like poison through the institutions these families control. Whoever finds this, be brave, be careful, but do not be silent. Catherine chose truth over safety, and so must you. Elena looked up from the letters, her mind reeling. This wasn't just historical evidence. This was documentation of ongoing corruption, a family legacy of crime spanning 175 years. Lucas. She began, then stopped. His face had gone white. He was staring past her, toward the trees. Elena turned and felt her heart stop. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. 30s, well-dressed despite the forest setting, expensive boots and a designer jacket. He held a phone, clearly having just finished taking photographs. Ms. Marsh, he said pleasantly. Mr. Bellamy would like a word. Lucas moved to stand between Elena and the man. We're on public land. We haven't done anything illegal. Of course not. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. But removing historical artifacts without proper permits, trespassing on protected archaeological sites, these things can be complicated. Mr. Bellamy simply wants to help Ms. Marsh navigate the legal complexities. Tell Mr. Bellamy. Elena started, but her phone rang. The school's number. Her blood turned to ice as she answered. Ms. Marsh. The secretary's voice was professional but strained. We need you to come pick up Sophie. She never arrived at her classroom this morning. We've searched the building, but the phone fell from Elena's hand. Sophie was gone. The portfolio slipped from her fingers as the world tilted. Lucas caught her arm, steadying her, but she could barely hear him over the roaring in her ears. The well-dressed man was speaking into his phone. Yes, sir. She has it. Both the journal and the portfolio. Yes, she understands now. He looked at Elena with something almost like pity. Mr. Bellamy will be in touch with instructions. I suggest you follow them carefully. Your daughter's safety depends on your cooperation. Then he walked away, disappearing into the trees like a ghost. Elena stood in the ruins of the hidden chapel, Catherine's evidence scattered at her feet, and understood exactly what the past 175 years had taught the Bellamy family. That power protected itself by any means necessary. That truth was dangerous only to those who spoke it. That a mother's love was the perfect leverage. Lucas was calling the police, his voice desperate and angry. But Elena knew the truth that Catherine had learned too late. The police wouldn't help. The authorities were already compromised. And somewhere in this town, her daughter was in the hands of people who'd gotten away with murder for nearly 2 centuries. She thought she was uncovering history. Instead, she'd walked straight into a trap that had been waiting for someone exactly like her. Someone who cared enough to be vulnerable. Someone who had everything to lose. The snow began to fall, covering the chapel ruins in white. And Elena Marsh learned what Catherine Bellamy had known in her final moments. That sometimes the price of truth was everything you loved. The call came an hour later. Elena sat in the monastery library, Lucas pacing beside her. The police having taken a report with eyes that said they already knew they wouldn't find anything. Deputy Sarah Chan had been sympathetic but unhelpful. Her words careful. Her gaze occasionally drifting to her phone as if waiting for instructions from someone else. When Elena's phone rang with an unknown number, her hand shook so badly Lucas had to steady it. Ms. Marsh. Harrison Bellamy III's voice was smooth, cultured, almost kind. I imagine you're quite worried. Let me assure you, Sophie is perfectly safe, comfortable, even. She's eating cookies and watching cartoons. She thinks she's visiting a nice family friend. Elena's throat closed. She managed one word. Where? That's not important. What's important is that we resolve this situation quickly and civilly. I'd like you to come to my home. We'll discuss the misunderstanding that's occurred. Misunderstanding? Elena's voice cracked. You kidnapped my daughter. Such harsh language. Sophie is simply visiting while we adults have a conversation. 1 hour. Ms. Marsh. The Bellamy estate on Mountain Road. Come alone, or come with your handyman friend. I don't mind. But come unarmed, and bring everything you found. The journal, the portfolio, any photographs or copies you've made. The line went dead. Lucas was already moving. We call the FBI. This is kidnapping, Elena. Federal crime. And how long does that take? Days? Weeks? Elena stood, her legs unsteady. Sophie doesn't have that time. You know what these people are capable of. Which is exactly why I'm going. Her voice was steel over terror. You don't have to come. Lucas stared at her for a long moment, then grabbed his jacket. Like hell, I'm letting you face them alone. The Bellamy estate sat on 50 acres of Vermont mountainside, a monument to wealth built on blood. The mansion was federal style, elegant and imposing, with columns that gleamed white even under gray December sky. As they drove up the circular drive, Elena spotted security cameras, discreet but everywhere. A man in a suit opened the door before they could knock. Ms. Marsh. Mr. Grant. This way, please. They were led through halls lined with portraits, generations of Bellamys staring down with expressions of entitled certainty. Elena recognized Catherine's father from his cruel mouth and calculating eyes. The resemblance to Harrison Bellamy III was unmistakable. Harrison waited in his study, seated behind a massive desk of dark wood. He stood as they entered, his smile welcoming, as if they were guests rather than victims. Please, sit. Can I offer refreshments? Where's my daughter? Elena remained standing. Safe, as I said. Please, Ms. Marsh. Let's be civilized. He gestured to leather chairs facing his desk. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. Elena sat only because her legs were shaking. Lucas stood behind her, his presence a silent support. Harrison settled back into his chair, studying them both. I understand you've been doing research into my family history, discovering some uncomfortable truths about the past. Your family murdered 7 people, stole money meant to help enslaved people escape, and you've been covering it up for 175 years. The past is complicated, Ms. Marsh. My great-great-great-grandfather made choices I wouldn't make today. But exposing those choices now, what purpose does it serve? Those people are long dead. Justice for them is impossible. But the harm to this community? That's very real. He pulled out a folder, sliding photographs across the desk. The Bellamy Medical Center, the factory bearing his family name that employed 300 people, the youth center, the library, the park. My family's wealth supports this entire region. If you destroy our reputation, you destroy the economic foundation of thousands of families. Jobs lost. Services cut. All for what? To punish people who've been dead for generations? To tell the truth. Truth is expensive, Ms. Marsh, and someone always pays the price. He leaned forward. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000. You keep the monastery, get the money you need for renovations and more. All you have to do is give me the journal, the portfolio, and agree never to speak of this again. Elena's hands clenched. $500,000. Sophie's college fund. Security. Everything they needed. And if I refuse? Harrison's smile didn't change, but his eyes went cold. He pulled out more photographs. Sophie at school. At the monastery. Playing in the cemetery. Each one a violation. A threat. Your daughter is 9 years old. Bright. Curious. So many years ahead of her. He paused. Accidents happen, Ms. Marsh. Children disappear. Even in small towns. Even with parents who love them desperately. Lucas lunged forward, but two men Elena hadn't noticed stepped from the shadows, blocking him. You're threatening a child, Elena said, her voice shaking with rage. I'm protecting my family, just as you want to protect yours. Harrison stood. 24 hours, Ms. Marsh. Bring me everything you found, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and Sophie comes home safe. Your daughter's life, or a dead woman's justice. That's the choice Catherine Bellamy faced. Now it's yours. He moved to the window, his back to them. Deputy Chun will escort you out. I suggest you spend the next 24 hours considering what matters most. Because once this deadline passes, I can't guarantee Sophie's continued safety. Outside, Chun waited by their car. Her face was tight, troubled, but she said nothing as they drove away. Elena stared out the window, Harrison's words echoing in her mind. Catherine had faced this same choice. Truth or safety. Justice or love. Catherine had chosen truth and died for it. Elena had 24 hours to decide if she was willing to do the same. Elena drove back to the monastery in silence, her mind churning through impossible calculations. 24 hours. Sophie's life balanced against 175 years of buried truth. Lucas tried to speak several times, but she couldn't hear him over the roar of maternal terror in her ears. The monastery came into view, and Elena's foot hit the brake hard. A woman stood on the front steps. Elderly, black, leaning on a carved wooden cane. She wore a long coat against the cold, and her eyes, sharp despite her age, tracked Elena's car with the patience of someone who'd been waiting a very long time. Who the hell? Lucas started, but Elena was already out of the car, instinct overriding caution. Who are you? If you're with the Bellamys, I'm not. The woman's voice was rich, cultured, carrying the weight of years. Though I've been watching them for decades. Watching and waiting. My name is Dr. Evelyn Winters. I believe you found something that belonged to my great-great-grandmother. Elena's breath stopped. Mary. Mary Winters, yes. Born Mary Sullivan. Died Mary Catherine Winters at age 83 in Boston. Evelyn smiled, but there was steel beneath it. She lived a long life after escaping Vermont. A happy one, mostly, with the woman she loved. Lucas had moved to Elena's side, protective. How did you know we'd be here? Because I arranged it. Evelyn's cane tapped against stone as she descended the steps. The monastery going to tax auction wasn't an accident, Mr. Grant. My family trust has been working for 5 years to get this property away from local control and into the hands of someone outside the Bellamy sphere of influence. Elena's mind reeled. You orchestrated everything? No. But I created the opportunity. I've been waiting for someone like you, Ms. Marsh. Someone desperate enough to take a risk on a crumbling building. Someone smart enough to find what Catherine left behind. Someone brave enough to care about a woman dead for 175 years. The Bellamys have my daughter. No. Evelyn's smile widened. They don't. My grandson acquired Sophie from their people approximately 3 hours ago. She's currently in Boston with Dr. Amara Okonkwo, eating pizza and learning about her mother's remarkable courage. The world tilted. Elena grabbed Lucas's arm to steady herself. Sophie's safe. Perfectly safe. The kidnapping was useful. It forced the Bellamys to show their hand, gave me legal grounds to act. My family has been protecting Catherine and Mary's legacy for 5 generations. Ms. Marsh, did you think we'd let their final testimony fall into Harrison Bellamy's hands? Evelyn pulled out her phone, turned it toward Elena. The screen showed Sophie, alive and whole, sitting at a table with a beautiful black woman, both of them laughing over a jigsaw puzzle. Mom! Sophie's voice came through the speaker. Dr. Okonkwo says you found something really important. She says you're a hero. Elena's knees buckled. Lucas caught her, holding her up as relief crashed through her like a wave. The safe deposit box Mary mentioned in her final letter? Evelyn continued. I've been adding to it for 40 years. Documentation of everything the Bellamy family has done since Catherine's time. Every bribe, every threat, every life they've destroyed. It's not just history anymore, Ms. Marsh. It's evidence that can bring down their entire empire. She met Elena's eyes, and Elena saw Catherine's determination reflected there, passed down through generations of women who'd refused to let truth die. Now I'm offering you the same choice Mary offered Catherine. Walk away with your daughter and $500,000 from my family's trust, compensation for what you've risked. Or stay, fight, help me finish what they started 175 years ago. Elena looked at the monastery, then at Lucas, then at her daughter's face on the phone screen. I need to see her first. I need to hold her and know she's really safe. Of course. Evelyn gestured to a car Elena hadn't noticed. We'll drive to Boston together. You'll have tonight with Sophie. And tomorrow, you'll decide what kind of world you want her to inherit. The drive to Boston took 4 hours through darkening December evening. Elena sat in the back of Evelyn's car, Lucas beside her, while Evelyn's grandson, a quiet man named Michael who'd executed Sophie's rescue with military precision, drove through increasing snow. Evelyn talked during the journey, filling in pieces of the story Elena had only glimpsed. Mary lived to be 83. She and Catherine had a life together that most people can't even imagine for that time. They ran a bookshop in Boston, lived as sisters publicly, but their friends knew the truth. Mary wrote everything down, not just about their life, but about the Bellamy family's continued corruption. She tracked them obsessively, documenting every suspicious business deal, every convenient death, every time they crushed someone who threatened their power. Like Lucas's father, Elena said quietly. Evelyn's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Like dozens of others over the years, the Bellamys adapted with the times. Outright murder became inconvenient in the modern era, so they refined their methods. Financial ruin, legal destruction, institutional pressure. But the pattern remained. Anyone who threatened them was eliminated. And you've been gathering evidence all this time. My mother before me, and her mother before her. 5 generations of Mary's descendants, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right combination of circumstances that would let us expose them without being destroyed in the process. Evelyn smiled grimly. You bought that monastery for $50, but you were worth far more than that to us. An outsider, someone with no local connections, no vulnerabilities they could exploit through community pressure. Someone desperate enough to take risks but smart enough to recognize what they'd found. You've been testing me. Evaluating. There's a difference. Evelyn's voice softened. And you passed every test, Elena. You cared about Catherine's story. You pursued truth even when it became dangerous. You chose right over safe, again and again. That's why I'm giving you this choice now, instead of simply using you as we could have. The car pulled up to an apartment building near Boston University. Dr. Amara Okonkwo's home, Evelyn explained. A historian who dedicated her career to uncovering suppressed truths about the Underground Railroad and had been waiting for evidence like Catherine's for 20 years. Then Elena was through the door and Sophie was in her arms, solid and real and safe, and nothing else mattered. Mom! Sophie clung to her, small body shaking. I was so scared. These men came to school and said you'd been in an accident, and I went with them, and then, I know, baby. I know. You're safe now. I've got you. They held each other while the others gave them space. Elena breathed in her daughter's shampoo smell, felt her heartbeat, and let herself believe it was real. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was exactly as Evelyn had described, brilliant, intense, with eyes that missed nothing. Her apartment was lined with books and documents, a scholar's sanctuary. She'd made hot chocolate for Sophie and had dozens of questions for Elena, but she held them back, understanding a mother needed time. That night, Sophie slept beside Elena on Amara's guest bed, one hand clutching her mother's shirt even in sleep. Elena lay awake, listening to her daughter breathe, feeling the weight of choice pressing down like the monastery's stone walls. In the morning, Sophie asked the question that changed everything. "Mom, did we do the right thing? Looking for that lady's secrets?" Elena looked at her daughter, 9 years old, perceptive beyond her years, already learning that right and safe weren't always the same thing. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. What do you think?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "Dr. Okonkwo says that Lady Catherine tried to help people who were running away from slavery, and bad people hurt her for it. That's not fair." "No, it's not. And those bad people's family is still here, still being bad. That's not fair either." "No," Elena agreed. "It's not." Sophie looked up at her with hazel eyes that held too much understanding. "If we don't tell the truth, does that make us bad too?" The question hung in the air. Elena thought about Catherine's final journal entry, about Mary's lifetime of documentation, about 5 generations of women keeping vigil over buried truth. That afternoon, Evelyn and Amara showed Elena the full scope of what they had. The safe deposit box contents filled a conference table, original documents from Catherine's time, layered with decades of additional evidence. Financial records showing ongoing embezzlement from charitable funds, documentation of bribes to state officials, evidence of environmental violations covered up through political pressure, a pattern of corruption spanning 175 years, all meticulously preserved. "If we release this," Amara explained, her voice tight with controlled excitement, "we can trigger criminal investigations at multiple levels. The historical evidence alone would require formal inquiries, but combined with the modern corruption, Harrison Bellamy could face actual charges. The whole family empire could collapse. But it will consume years of your life," Evelyn warned. "Legal battles, media attention. The Bellamys will come after you with everything they have. They'll try to discredit you, bankrupt you, destroy your reputation. You'll never have a quiet life again." Elena looked at the documents, then at Sophie playing with Amara's cat in the corner. She thought about the choice Catherine had faced. Truth or safety, justice or survival. Then she thought about what Catherine had written to Mary in that final letter Evelyn had shared with her that morning. Written when Catherine was 60, looking back on 40 years of exile. "I never regretted choosing truth over safety, though it cost me everything I'd been born to. Silence would have meant living as half myself, complicit in evil through my cowardice. I chose instead to be whole, even if that wholeness came with a price. I hope someday someone will finish what we started. I hope they'll be braver than I was, and luckier." Elena met Evelyn's eyes. "I'm in." Lucas, who'd been quiet all morning, took her hand. "Then I'm in too. For my father. For everyone they crushed." Amara's smile was fierce. "Then let's bring them down." They spent the rest of the day planning. Coordinated release through multiple channels, academic publication, major media outlets, simultaneous delivery to state and federal authorities. A strategy designed to prevent suppression, to make the truth too public and too documented to bury. "We go in 1 week," Evelyn decided. "That gives us time to prepare, to ensure every piece of evidence is authenticated and documented. Harrison Bellamy will use these 7 days to pressure you, threaten you, try everything to stop this. Can you hold firm?" Elena looked at Catherine's journal, at Mary's careful documentation, at 175 years of women refusing to let truth die. "Yes," she said, "I can hold firm." That night, she read Catherine's final letter to Mary aloud to Sophie, explaining who these women were and what they'd sacrificed. Sophie listened with the gravity of someone who understood she was part of something bigger than herself. "They were brave," Sophie said when Elena finished. "Yes, they were. Are we going to be brave too? Elena pulled her daughter close. We're going to try. Outside, Boston's lights glittered against dark sky. Inside, a mother and daughter held each other, and 5 generations of women's work moved toward completion. The past was finally going to speak. And this time, the world was going to listen. The release happened on a Tuesday morning in mid-December. At 8 a.m., Dr. Amara Okonkwo published her academic paper online, complete with authenticated documents and peer review. By 8:15, the Boston Globe ran Elena's interview with photocopied evidence splashed across their homepage. At 8:30, sealed packages arrived simultaneously at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, the FBI field office in Boston, and 3 major television networks. At 8:45, a documentary filmmaker Evelyn had spent 2 years preparing began releasing video evidence on social media, each post going viral within minutes. Harrison Bellamy, 3, learned about it over breakfast. Elena knew because Evelyn's sources, people inside his own organization who'd been waiting years for this moment, reported his reaction. The coffee cup smashing against the wall, the phone calls that went unanswered, the realization, spreading across his face like dawn, that 175 years of carefully maintained lies were crumbling in real time. By noon, Deputy Sarah Chan had turned state's evidence, producing her own documentation of pressure from the Bellamy family. By evening, Harrison was arrested on current embezzlement charges, misappropriation of educational funds, environmental violations, bribery of state officials. The historical evidence triggered its own investigations. Archaeologists descended on the monastery grounds, and within 3 days, they'd found them. 7 graves in the forest north of the hidden chapel, exactly where Catherine's documents said they'd be. Skeletal remains that told stories of violence. People who died far from home, murdered for the crime of seeking freedom. Elena watched from the monastery window as news crews filmed the excavation. Father Marcus Webb arrived that afternoon, his face aged with guilt and relief. He confessed publicly what he'd known, accepting whatever consequences came. The church, he said, had been complicit through silence. That silence ended now. Lucas stood beside Elena as the evening news reported his father's exoneration. Evidence showed the Bellamys had fabricated everything. The documents, the witnesses, the entire case built on lies. 20 years too late for justice, but vindication nonetheless. Lucas wept silently, and Elena held his hand, understanding that some wounds could heal even if the scars remained. "Mom," Sophie said from the doorway, "did we do the right thing?" Elena looked at the graves being carefully excavated, each one finally receiving the dignity of acknowledgement. 7 people whose names had been lost but whose deaths now mattered. 7 souls who'd be properly buried, properly honored, their stories finally told. "Yes, sweetheart, we did the right thing." The legal battles stretched for months. The Bellamys fought with everything they had, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple family members faced charges. The corruption reached higher than anyone had imagined. Connections to state officials, judges, business leaders. The entire network of power built on Catherine's father's crimes began unraveling. 3 months later, on a March morning when snow finally gave way to mud season, Elena stood in what had been the monastery library. The building hummed with construction now, proper construction, funded by restitution from the Bellamy estate. The monastery was being converted into a museum and educational center, documenting Underground Railroad history and LGBTQ+ struggles. A place where hidden stories would be preserved and celebrated. Elena directed the project. Her art history degree finally meant something, her skills put to use for work that mattered. Sophie helped plant a memorial garden where the 7 victims would be honored. Lucas worked as head of preservation, his craftsmanship restoring the building that had nearly destroyed them both. On the spring equinox, they dedicated the monument. Catherine and Mary's story told in bronze and stone, 2 women who'd loved each other when loving was dangerous, who'd chosen truth when silence was safer. Evelyn spoke about her great-great-grandmother's courage. Mary's descendants came from across the country, dozens of them, all carrying pieces of the story that had been passed down through generations. They laid flowers at Catherine's grave, properly marked now, and wept for ancestors who'd loved bravely in a cruel time. Elena read Catherine's final journal entry aloud, the incomplete sentence finally given context. I cannot go without the evidence. Too many have suffered. She paused, then added her own completion. But Catherine's evidence survived. Her truth survived. And today, 178 years later, justice finally catches up to the men who thought they could bury both. Afterward, Elena and Sophie stood before the grave, Sophie holding a bouquet of early spring flowers. Tell me about her again, Sophie said. About Catherine. So Elena did. She told her daughter about a young woman who'd had everything: wealth, status, security, and gave it all up for truth and love. About choosing right over easy, justice over safety. About the price of courage and the power of one person refusing to stay silent. She changed everything, Sophie said. She did. And so did Mary. And so did all the women who came after, who kept the evidence safe, who waited for the right moment. Elena knelt beside her daughter. And so did you, sweetheart, by being brave when I needed you to be, by asking the right questions. They placed the flowers on Catherine's grave together, and Elena felt the weight of the past finally lift. Not disappear. The past never truly disappeared, but transform into something lighter, into memory honored rather than truth buried, into justice, imperfect but real. The monastery stood behind them, no longer crumbling but rising, a place of secrets becoming a place of truth, a monument to all the voices that had been silenced, finally given space to speak. Elena had bought this building for $50, desperate and afraid, seeking only survival. She'd found instead a purpose, a calling, a way to turn her daughter's inheritance from debt and desperation into something meaningful. Sophie would grow up knowing that truth mattered, that one person's courage could echo through centuries, that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. The spring sun broke through clouds, warming the cemetery where 7 victims now rested in honor rather than anonymous graves, where Catherine and Mary's love story was carved in stone for all time, where the past had finally, after 178 years, received the justice it deserved. And Elena Marsh, former art history dropout, single mother, accidental revolutionary, stood in the light and understood what Catherine had known all along. Some secrets were meant to be uncovered. Some truths were worth any price. And sometimes, the most desperate gambles led to exactly where you were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.